Welcome back to the Positively Jacked podcast, where we dish real-time strategies, or RTS, on nutrition, fitness, wellness, and lifestyle trends to prioritize positive psychological habits and best practices. Our mission each episode is to relay helpful information in topics relating to health, mental or physical, nutrition, lifestyle, and habit formation. And this is the second solo episode for me. Jess is off doing amazing things, as always. And so I'm going to be covering a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart as far as my education, my background, but also I think everyone can relate to. So today we're going to be unpacking fear and anxiety as it relates to the fitness space and what stops people from walking into the gym or asking a coach for help. And honestly, it might be a bigger contributor towards anytime you feel as though failure is pending than you think, right? It's not laziness. It's actually just psychology. I'm going to paint a little picture. So, the mere thought of something you're afraid of or something you're anxious about can stop you dead in your tracks, right? Your brain can't tell the difference necessarily when you're trying to walk into a gym and you have anxiety and fear built up. Your brain can't tell the difference between if it's you're being chased by a bear or simply trying something new. You walk into the gym and you don't know where to stand. You don't know what machine is the right machine, or if you know how to use the machine properly. Does anybody notice that you don't know how to use the machine? Are you breathing too loud? Are you taking up too much space? There's so many things that go into our heads, especially if it's not an environment we are comfortable with. So this episode isn't about necessarily motivational quotes or that grind culture. It's really about mental roadblocks that stop people from even taking the first step into a new fitness journey. So we're going to be going over a little bit of the science behind why we avoid unfamiliar spaces and what fear and anxiety have to do with that. Simple ways to reframe fear so that you can kind of take an idea and maybe start with it and move forward a little. And then we have some really cool listener Q&A that came from our social media earlier this week, and I can't thank everyone enough for contributing to that. I do have to give a quick disclaimer, though. I am not a licensed medical or mental health professional, such as a psychologist, psychiatrist, or counselor. I do have a fairly extensive experience in this area from my degree or degrees, but my goal is always to come at this from the angle of a coach. Right? I want to know where we're lacking, what your aspirations are. I want to learn with you. I want to introduce new tools, and hopefully that leads towards some betterment. But if you feel that you are in need of something more than what a coach can provide, I do recommend that you seek out some type of mental health assistance. I cannot suggest enough people start going to therapy, counseling, and just seeking out mental health professionals more often. I think it's a very underutilized service if and when you can find it. So we're going to kick off with fear and anxiety and what research really says about this. And I'm going to go ahead and attach references in the show notes for today, just so I don't have to go over essentially a bibliography by the end of this podcast. So we're going to go straight from just some information based in the American Psychological Association, which is the main governing body in the United States for psychological research. And the way they define fear and anxiety is pretty simple. Fear is response to a known threat or something that is actively threatening you. Anxiety, on the other hand, is response to a perceived or unknown threat, basically your imagination of something bad happening. Fear, if you can equate it to something, is about next to being something like your house being on fire. And anxiety is checking your oven 12 times to double check that you turned it off. So those are the ways we're going to be looking at fear and anxiety for pretty much the rest of the discussion. Now, one thing that we all have in common when it comes to fear is that we are all in our brains in some way, shape, or form very afraid of the unknown. It's one of the biggest psychological culprits that really holds people back, is that there is an unknown ahead of them, and it's really baked into our wiring that we would be not ready for that, very fearful of that, very avoidant of that, anything that's unknown, because When it's unknown, our brain has a tendency to fill in the blanks, and it's almost all too easy to fill in those blanks with some of the worst possible outcomes or worst scenarios. Uh, and so there's actually a term in research called intolerance of uncertainty. And this is a reference we'll put in the bottom. Carlton, it's actually a book, Intolerance of Certainty as a Core Anxiety Trait. But this intolerance of uncertainty is basically, if we don't know what to expect, our brains are going to start playing a horror film inside of our head, or even like dramatic reality TV. And so it's a lot of the motivating factor that really why you walk into a gym and your immediate thoughts are similar to walking into a foreign country. You don't know the language, you don't know the customs, you don't know where anything is, you don't know necessarily who works there or what they do there. It's just a very unknown environment. And so it can be incredibly intimidating and fear producing and anxiety producing. So I'm bringing all this up because understanding fear, anxiety, and kind of how our brains already work gives us leverage. We can stop, blaming ourselves or thinking we should know better, and start navigating with a little bit more awareness. A lot of times when somebody feels like they're coming up short, they automatically assume they're the problem. And realistically, we all have somewhat of the same problem, and it's not even necessarily a problem. It's just the way our brains work, right? Fear of the unknown is kind of an evolutionary trait. Like if something we did not know, we did not feel safe moving forward, then we probably wouldn't have done it. So I like that I bring in the evolutionary side because that segues into the next point. Your amygdala, basically what governs your judgment and reasoning, doesn't care if it's a barbell or a snake or a saber-toothed tiger. It's something you're afraid of. And so your brain is going to react both between the ears and physiologically down the body as though you are afraid of that thing. And it's going to be a very hard thing to kick. One thing that this reaction does in our brains is starts to bring into, if you're a fairly self-aware person or trying to be, it brings in a little bit of psychological safety and shame. Because if you have this notion that you're supposed to be in the know and capable of all these things, and then you have the fear or have the anxiety deter you from that, there's a little bit of shame, there's a little bit of judgment, not only on yourself, but you also feel like you're being seen as this amateur or novice in this new place. And because those build up, it leads to avoidance, right? Nobody wants to willingly put themselves into somewhere that makes them feel not safe and in a shameful situation. So I want to bring in the idea of vulnerability here, because psychological safety and shame are two very key points here, but they both tie into vulnerability, or allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And this little bit of pull from Brene Brown's work, if you're familiar with them, it's a beautiful quote. Vulnerability isn't just about winning or losing. It is about showing up and being seen when you have no control of the outcome. So I know personally vulnerability is really tough for me, because in my role as a coach and, as a friend, as a partner, all these things, being vulnerable means that you are very at peace. Well, not necessarily at peace. It means that you're acknowledging that you don't control a whole lot, right? It means that you are willing to open yourself up to the unknown. And that's a really hard thing for me to do, because I'm supposed to have those answers. I'm supposed to be the type of person that can bring that to the fold. But the truth is that I accept it as a learning opportunity as often as I can, because I'm of the forever a student mindset. And so vulnerability really is about acknowledging and being comfortable with being a student and understanding that the outcome is going to be what it's going to be, but you want to put yourself in the best or a situation that will lead you to understanding that outcome. So we've covered a little bit of ground, but try to keep those definitions and areas of fear and anxiety in the frame, because now we're going to start applying this a little bit towards fitness, nutrition, and coaching. And this is really where I enjoy my job, because fear and anxiety are the ultimate crushers of people who are trying to look for something simply better for themselves. And because of several factors that, fear and anxiety can contribute to, it stops a lot more people before, or rather than starts them. And so I do want to take a note really quick before we apply this into fitness, that anxiety and fear, while they do prevent things and while they are not fun to have, I'm just going to say that emotions are never necessarily a bad thing. It's really just your body giving you a signal that something is, off, wrong, this, that, or the other. Emotions should be responded to, appropriately. Utilize them. Don't necessarily just try to steer away from them. If your body is telling you you're afraid of something or you're anxious about something, take that as a cue. Take that as a possible call to action and a way to possibly lead you into diminishing that fear or anxiety to a very moderate amount, or maybe even completely off the table. So, big points that we're going to really kind of address here. We're going to start out with that people don't fear the gym itself, right? A lot of times it's the idea of being an outsider, or the idea of looking foolish, or looking very amateur. So when people go to the gym, I try to connect it to something you've already conquered. So a lot of times we'll say in a consultation how someone comes in and they're, they've finished a degree, they might be a parent or a really successful working professional. And so they clearly have, a few pieces in their track record of setting out to achieve something, taking on that novice or that student status, despite fear and possibly anxiety being a part of the equation, and overcoming it. And so I want to tie that back whenever you think possibly about anxiety or fear within the gym setting. I'm sure there are examples that you can pull from of times when fear and anxiety were there and you were able to overcome it. So if you're here today listening to this podcast, more likely than not, you have overcome some pretty big obstacles when fear and anxiety were present. And the gym or working with a coach and stuff like that, that should be no different. Another one we get a lot is the I don't know what I'm doing anxiety, right? Gym jargon, complex machines, being watched, people you don't know, seeing you work out, seeing you be very vulnerable, trying to train. This same fear can show up in nutrition too, right? What if I get it wrong? What if somebody judges me? It really adds complexity to these goals that we try to set out for. And so when it comes to the I don't know what I'm doing anxiety, this is going to come from, I've been strength and conditioning, coaching, personal training, stuff like that since I was about 18 years old. And I will be the first to tell you that no one knows everything. And all of us are always learning. And anybody who tells you different is trying to, either delude themselves or delude you. But when it comes to the I don't know what I'm doing anxiety, it's a tough spin, but you're starting to look at the gym or this fitness atmosphere as the giant spectrum of possible known solutions in fitness, and you don't know what you're doing. Well, that's okay, because if you knew what you were doing already, then fear and anxiety wouldn't be present. So they're really just, both sides are telling you something about that subject or about that area in relation to yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean you're coming up short or that it's going to be a bad thing. It just means that you either don't have a body of work yet to feel like you know what you're doing, or you do have a body of work that makes you feel like you know what you're doing. But also in that, coming from me, there's still so much out there that is evolving and advancing and things to learn. So if you keep that forever student mentality, there's always more to learn. Fear of failing publicly is another big one, right? Seeing it firsthand with clients, and honestly, I felt it myself. The fear of looking foolish or not knowing enough, it's universal, but we can get through it. What if I mess up? What if I drop a barbell? What if I let a weight stack hit really loud? The one thing I can say here is that, you can take a trip on the internet to look at gym fails nowadays. But what I will say is that a lot of people forget that they too were novices in the gym. They were ones who contributed to little mistakes, little hiccups here and there, odd occasions in the gym. I remember myself, quick little story. I caught not caught. I had a barbell that was loaded with way too much weight, slam me in the back of the head and make me headbutt the floor in the middle of my own gym. When I look back on it, it could have been incredibly embarrassing. And honestly, it should have filled me with anxiety because I don't know how I didn't get hurt. But, you know, failure, or I guess testing yourself against a large body of knowledge that you don't have as much experience in, failure is really just kind of part of the process. It's going to be there. That if it was a straight shot, or if it was too easy of a route to take, and you didn't have a failure and it was smooth sailing, not only would you not feel like it was as worth it as if you had some trials and tribulation, but it would make for a pretty bad story, right? Imagine if Frodo was given the ring and then he just walked to Mordor in less than a day and dumped it in the fire. That doesn't make for a very good story. A big one that people have when it comes to joining a gym or hiring a coach is the fear of wasting money or time. The thing I will say about money is that you are the only one who knows what would be considered wasteful or stretching your budget. In the fitness space, I always say before you contribute dollars to it, that you really vet the process. It is a relationship when you're hiring a coach. It is an environment in the community when you sign up for a gym. And for that to deserve your dollars, deserves a good amount of thought and critical thinking. Now, when it comes to wasting time, I would argue that fear or anxiety have possibly contributed to you wasting enough time already, if this is something that's important to you and that's been in the back of your mind to starting into the fitness space. So realistically, it's just about how comfortable you feel wasting time in whichever entity, right? So you could either waste time trying something new, or you can waste time worrying about what something new might do for you. But we've already kind of gone over how worry and the unknown will fill in some of the worst case scenarios, and it'll always be a little bit more daunting than it could actually be in real life. So you get to pick what and how you waste your time, quote unquote, or possibly waste your time. Another one, fear of losing identity or comfort. Okay, so this is a really big one because a lot of people who I've worked with have had fitness, health, wellness, nutrition as some part of their life, but it was, a high school sport, or possibly relatives or, people close to them that had it prioritized. So they never really made it their own. And by not making it their own, or by being heavily dictated to, they feel like they're going to lose their identity or step into an identity they weren't ready for, or an identity or style that they're not comfortable with. And something that I always try to point out to people is, first, your starting point, it's not supposed to look perfect, right? It's going to be you going into something brand new. So it is a beginning. So you take with you all the things that make you you. And I like to say that everything in your life led to that moment. And in that moment, are you happy? Are you in control? Do you enjoy, are you liking, are you looking forward to what you're doing? And if it's a no, then we talk about, okay, well, what's missing? But if it's a yeah, that you feel pretty good about your life and how things are going, then that's when we decide to move forward. But your identity is part of what brought you to where you are. And hopefully in this context, it is a gym space or in a circumstance where you're going to be discussing things with a coach. I really want anyone out there trying to think about a coach or a gym is, you got to understand that fear and anxiety are potent, and building trust and normalizing beginner struggles and celebrating small wins, whether that's with a small community, with yourself, or with a coach, those things will build up to start to take away the potential power that fear and anxiety have in the circumstances above that we kind of talked about. And I really hope people understand that if you feel unaware or unknown into what you're going to be going into, the only way to decrease that is to get some known. And so to dip your toe in, to test the waters, and trust yourself that if you feel the ship moving in a direction you do not feel comfortable with, that you can put a stop on it, or put a few more extra directions to it, or you can completely take a step back. and reevaluate and look from a bird's eye view. And if you need to plot a new course, you can, but it's going to take getting wet to really understand, how you need to move forward and if it's the right thing for you. So a lot of things that we've discussed so far kind of fell into a bit of reframing, right? We like to use that term a lot in reframing fear and trying to build courage or build a little bit of a self-awareness. So when fear or anxiety are in the way, how do we move forward? A lot of people try to pretend it's not there and they blind themselves to it. I don't recommend that. I think that you should be curious about it. As we said before, if there's fear and anxiety, on the other side of that spectrum is likely gathering of knowledge and being well learned in that particular area. So you have less fear and less anxiety because you understand it better. So with fear and anxiety becomes an opportunity. So a beautiful quote, and I think Jess provided this one, was fear is not the enemy, it's the invitation, right? It's the invitation to learn something new. It's the invitation to try something new. And that's why we're there. So the best thing you can do is shrink that size of the unknown. Take a tour, ask a coach a question, do a workout. We call it a little bit of like micro bravery, is that you're really exposing yourself gently, but enough to stimulate some adaptation. And it leads to bigger and better steps. So if you're worried about coming into the gym, maybe make a call with the gym. If you're worried about working with a single coach, maybe schedule a few calls with different coaches and try to vet the process and see what their styles are and which one clicks with you. So these little bits don't take necessarily anything other than maybe a phone call or a reach out, but they can be that initial bump in momentum that slowly ripples out into the bigger, more fear-inducing and more anxiety-producing components, such as actually entering the gym or going into your first workout. If you haven't heard us use it before on this podcast, I really love using the hero's journey metaphor. We used it a little earlier with the Frodo, but you're not supposed to know everything at the start of something new. The gym, I will say this, most gyms, right? I can't say the gym in general because there are some bad gyms out there, it's just the way it goes. But for the most part, the gym and that environment, it's not your enemy. It's a challenge, right? It's an unknown challenge. It's the Dragon's Cave. It's going to Mordor. It's what else is there? The Dark Castles. It's all these things where, that could be where you rescue someone. That could be where you get a treasure, a magical item. That's your future self finding that place and navigating through it and overcoming it is going to leave with something that makes them feel a little bit more emboldened, or as though that challenge was worth it. And I know there's people out there that are just like, Frodo lost a finger and some people died and stuff like that. Well, that's why, we're using this as a metaphor and not a literal sense. But a really quick practical reframe, and because I don't want you to have to walk towards the gym and start quoting Elijah Wood, is when you're coming into a situation of the unknown, I want you to ask yourself, what is the absolute worst thing that could happen? But then at the same time, you need to ask yourself, what is the absolute best thing that can happen? Because if it's unknown, then that means that both the best and the worst case scenarios are just as likely because they haven't happened yet. And so you have to acknowledge both sides. And sometimes, right, if you frame it right and you set the pieces in place and have little components of micro bravery, then sometimes when you think about what could be the best result when it comes to this new venture, stepping into the gym, you're able to grab onto that a little bit more. You're able to give yourself a little bit more of motivation and hope in that the fear and anxiety will be overcome by you because you trust yourself to see it through. And maybe you don't necessarily get the absolute best, but maybe you do get a point of an awareness where you can make the next decision feeling more informed, which also lessens the anxiety. And then you go from there. And that's the way the journey goes, is that you try it, you gather data, you see if you cross that finish line, you look back from a bird's eye view or an objective view, and rinse, wash, and repeat. And this leads to this habit stacking we talked about, momentum builders. It really leads to you getting more familiar with overcoming fear as opposed to always letting it defeat you or stop you in your tracks before you even start. So those are some of our reframes, and those are, the main areas as far as applying fear and anxiety as with regards to fitness. So now I'm going to try to tie back some of our listener Q&As, and I've already kind of touched base on a few, but I really like to rather attack these a little more head on. One of the first ones is, what's my advice for someone scared to even step in a gym? And I would go back to what I said earlier, is that if your goal is to step foot into a gym, one of the best things you can do is call that gym firsthand and see if there's someone who works there that is really good with people, would love to showcase the gym to you. And then you're not doing it alone, right? You already have a guide, if you will. You've already kind of talked to Gandalf, and he's going to walk you through the first leg of your journey. So if the goal in your head that is providing fear and anxiety is too much, take 1 or 2 steps back and see if that's something that's attainable, if that's something that's a little bit more low barrier to entry that can build towards the place your mind is going. We've already kind of gone over fear of looking like you're new, but someone brought in the idea of having a perfectionist mindset. And we've gone over this a few times in different episodes, but that doesn't make it any less important. It's about a perfect journey in which you felt ownership and as though you were self-aware throughout, leading you into several different goals. And so the journey itself the goal is to be perfect in that you overcome more things, but it's very rare that you will be perfect off the bat. If you are one of those crazy people, and I've seen this before too, is that just between genetics and athletic background, people can take to certain things so quickly and it's absurd. But if you are somebody with a perfectionist mindset, I want you to think of the entire body of work a little bit more as opposed to that initial burst into something, because no matter what in the unknown, doesn't matter how skilled you are, genetic components, everything like that, there are going to be things that will humble you. And that's in no way, shape, or form meant to take it away from you. It literally is just part of being in a situation where growing pains are a guarantee. And so we can either make peace with the growing pains and move along, or say that the growing pains aren't worth it and completely restructure and reorient towards something different. This kind of ties into it as well, but we had somebody ask about performance and being judged on numbers that they were putting up, whether it be on the treadmill or on a machine or lifting weights. And the thing I will say to that is that your journey is your own. When it comes to building blocks of success, take a look at your former self, and that's where the comparison should come from. Everybody's journey is different. Everybody's base of knowledge is different. Everybody's genetics are different. All these things contribute to being a very different product as they come through. And so if you feel that you're being judged based off of a performance, I want you to ask where that's coming from. If it's coming based off of self, try to make sure that the comparison is fair towards your previous self and your former self. And we could talk a little bit more about past athletes that have trouble comparing their old numbers to the new. I know I'm part of that boat. But if the anxiety is coming from within, more often than not, you need to try to hone in on the exact reason why that narrative is there. And if you can, try to go with some of the examples we gave before, is reframe it to where, you're thinking about relative to this programming cycle, relative to this place in your life, that your performances are solely based on comparison to previous self. And that previous self in this particular instance could be very new to the game. And all you got to look at is how much you have built in possibly a short amount of time, and try to give yourself some credit. If you're in a place where it is actively, outwardly people judging you, find a new gym, because if anybody is poking fun of or trying to intimidate you based on the numbers you are, that individual is toxic and you don't need to be training around them anyways. We've kind of gone over fear of losing yourself or conscientiousness. And one thing that I will say is that somebody brought into the fold, this was a female, that brought into the fold the idea of a body changing, right? Because we're talking about lifting weights and nutrition, as well as having a good or a strained relationship with food, because in resulting of looking at fitness and nutrition, it could be very slippery slope, which I totally understand. What I would say is that when it comes to your body changing, I can tell you that it probably will, but it's also because you're providing it a stimulus that you've never, or you very rarely provided it before. And so it might change. But again, if it starts to change in a way that you do not want it to change, you can always choose to step back and look at a different route. When it comes to nutrition, kind of similar. If you are fueling in a way that makes you unhappy and doesn't leave you feeling, happy, hungry, healthy, and another H that I won't use so we don't get an explicit rating. But essentially, there are certain things when it comes to the nutrition side and lifestyle things where I do firmly believe that you should have those things supporting a good feeling body, good feeling mentality. And anytime that conscientiousness leads to possibly straining a relationship with fitness or food, it's a good time to step back and reevaluate your why. And it's a great time to look at the whole product of what you're trying to achieve as a person, not just inside the walls of the gym. So we have one more that I want to go for, and this is particularly important to me because I am a coach, but fear of accountability from a coach. Keeping accountable, also modifying on the fly. A coach-athlete or a coach-client relationship is very special. It's very unique. Not all of them work the same. Having said that, I can only speak from my own experience and experience that I've had with other friends of mine who I think are some of the best coaches. Any coach that is, in my opinion, worth it will always see things as a sliding scale and fluctuation of what you can commit and when you can commit to it. And they will have good experience and ideas of how to make that as optimized as possible for where you're at in your life. If you are worried about being accountable to a coach, it's kind of a two-way street. Coaches, believe it or not, are really worried sometimes about being accountable to athletes as well, making sure you're getting the right workouts, making sure that the stimulus is appropriate for you, making sure they're taking into consideration all the life things that happen, when lifes. So what I would say is that fear of accountability from a coach is no different than fear of accountability from anybody that you're trying to learn from. That's why I say it's so critical to have a good relationship and good communication. The coach's accountability is there to make sure you feel as though you're progressing, owning, and getting a good body of work that you feel emboldens you. If it feels like the accountability is coming more as from an authoritative state or like parental, and you feel bad about logging stuff, or you feel bad and you don't log stuff because of that, then I would just communicate with the coach. Maybe it's not the right fit. Maybe it's not the right type of training for you. And that's totally okay, right? That's the idea of this whole conversation, is that we trust ourselves to take the step, move forward with it. And then you could get 3 to 6 months into a program and realize that this style is not for me. And I actually use this a lot of times in my initial consults, is that individual programming and coach design are not for everybody because it can be lonely. But having said that, my goal as a coach is to always build autonomous individuals, right? Where if we only train together for 3 months and you feel that you learned something, you feel more self-aware, you feel like the fear of the unknown has been diminished or even completely removed when it comes to fitness and nutrition, but the individual coaching side of things just doesn't work for you, I'm absolutely fine with that. I don't think coaches who hold on to athletes as a ownership or some type of part of their identity is a good thing. I think all athletes, all clients should strive to be as autonomous from their coach eventually as possible. And then the relationship with the coach and the relationship with the client becomes a choice. It becomes a proactive choice of the value that the relationship brings, not necessarily the utility of just coach-athlete relationship, which I don't think the buck should stop there. I think this is a very relationship-based business and relationship-based model, and that should come first as opposed to the transactional side of it. So went a little bit longer than I originally anticipated, but honestly, I'm so glad I got to cover so much and so many examples around fear and anxiety when it comes to the fitness space. I think this is a big thing. I think it's one of the things that takes away a lot of people's potential for seeing a better version of themselves. And so when it comes to fear and anxiety, just understand that we are wired to fear the unknown. But also stepping into the unknown is one of the only ways we can really grow. So Last pieces, I'm going to give a couple of bonus tips here when it comes to the fear and anxiety discussion. Use 1 to 2 light anecdotes or analogies. What is this? No. Yeah, we already did that. I don't know why I even read that part. But a challenge this week that I would like everybody to, if you're listening, give it a try. Do one thing that scares you slightly in the direction of health goals. So I'm going to give an example for myself. I'm not a runner. I've never been a runner before until about 2 years ago when I started running for my back because my back couldn't take the lifting I was doing. Yesterday, I went out and ran when I was quite full of fear because it was a thunderstorm and I needed to get my miles. And I was afraid not only of the storm and the situation that I was running in and the long distance, but also if I tried to make up that run later in the week, when would I make it up? What would be appropriate? What would it take away from myself? The list goes on and on. And then eventually I was just like, there's only one way to find out. And I stepped out of my truck and I went on a run. And hilariously enough, I ran through storm, lightning, wind, and tornado sirens. But when I got done and when I got home and dried off and recovered, I had a wash of happiness, of joy, and knowing that in the face of fear, I stepped out and I did it. And I did a run that was longer than I've ever done before. And that's really the only way to overcome fear and anxiety, is that eventually, no matter how much data you have, no matter how much information you try to get, eventually you do have to take a step in the direction. And I hope you trust yourself enough to take that step. And as always, if you are in the need of coaching and advice or consultation in the best ways to move forward in those realms, we're always here. So that concludes it for our fear and anxiety solo podcast. I don't know why I'm saying our, like I had 2 people here, but I'm still getting used to filming and recording these solo. So fear and anxiety is part of the puzzle. There's many ways we can overcome it, but just accept it. Be curious about it. And also give it a try this week to try something that scares you. And as always, stay positively jacked.